Gunna's betrayal has broken Young Thug.
YSL is a music label and a gang, and you have personal knowledge that members or associates of YSL have committed crimes in furtherance of the gang.
Yes, ma'am.
Because the YSL boss went from looking rugged on the day of his arrest to this on the day Gunna ratted him out. But sadly, Gunna wasn't the only YSL member that turned on Thugger. In this video, we're gonna see how Young Thug reacted to the other betrayals, to the other rats in his squad, to the YSL members who snitched on him. Understanding what got Young Thug face flat in an Atlanta courtroom looking depressed and tired requires digging into the young man's past. Who was Young Thug? For most people in the industry, this is a dumb question. Young Thug is a musical genius, easily one of the most defining artists of his generation. His sound revitalized and gave trap music its stamp of approval. He expanded the definition of hip-hop as an art form and paved the way to a new generation of artists. You wouldn't have been wrong to call him one of the most influential artists living today. If you doubt me somehow, then consider this. Do you remember this song? There were only 3 writers who brought the iconic track to life: Childish Gambino, Ludwig Göransson, and yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But all that is just one side of the two-faced coin called Jeffrey Williams, aka Young Thug. The image of Jeffrey Williams would be incomplete if we didn't talk about the life of the rapper outside the confines of the studio. The man who brought together the controversial YSL label, and the boy who grew up in the Jonesboro South Projects of Atlanta.
Me and my little sister, the last 2, and we got the same dad. My mom got 11 kids, she got 4 or 5 baby daddy.
Now, Young Thug might have grown up in the projects, but the hood that really shaped the man he would eventually become was Cleveland Avenue. For the uninitiated, Cleveland Avenue is one of those hoods you wouldn't want to be caught dead in, because no one will be stupid enough to reclaim your body. If that paints the picture well enough, then you can probably imagine the kind of background Thugger was coming from. Cleveland Avenue was home for the young man. It shaped his sound, and eventually the notorious Blood gang that ran that territory became his second family. Now, stick with me, because this is where the whole situation begins to get complicated. After attracting the attention of Gucci Mane and getting signed under the rapper's label, after experiencing repeated successes and establishing his name as one of Atlanta's greats, Thugger decides to create a label in 2014, which he named YSL. And here, right here, is where you could say all his troubles began. In the beginning, Young Thug was a known member of the Blood gang. At the time, his nickname was Lil Jeff, but after some time, Young Thug and rappers from Cleveland Avenue started referring to themselves as YSL. YSL? What is YSL? Listen very carefully, because the major claim prosecutors have been making against Thugger and his squad lies in the answer. You see, it depends entirely on who's answering the question. Because if it's Thugger on the other end of the line, he'll tell you in no unclear terms that YSL is just a music label. He says it is an acronym for his Young Stoner Life Records. In fact, it is a platform, a legal enterprise he made to sign talents and give them the opportunity to become millionaires like he did. That's why he signed all his day ones, from Lil Duke to Yak Gotti, the late Lil Keed to Lil Got It and Gunna. So how true is this claim? Well, anyone who knows Gunna knows it was very true. Under YSL, everyone ate well. His family, his squad, everyone. And it's under the same label that Gunna has become the hip-hop superstar he is today. But, and there's a big but, if you were asking the feds the same question, what is YSL? They'd tell you that it was a label, all right. A label of criminals and gangbangers. They'd tell you it was a front shop for a street gang that was affiliated with the Bloods in a twisted, almost unholy alliance that has seen more people dead than they've become millionaires. They'd also tell you that YSL pushed more notoriety than they pushed music, beefing with a rival pseudo label named YFN that has led to the death of over 50 people in the last 8 years. It's a lot to break down, but I'm gonna walk you through it, because that is the rivalry that gave birth to this RICO case. While Cleveland Avenue belongs to YSL, 14 minutes away, another neighborhood called Summerhill belongs to YFN.
What does YFN stand for and who's in it?
Young Fly about cash.
This man right here, YFN Lucci, is Young Thug's biggest op. He also happens to be the head of the YFN gang. Sorry, I meant label. Now you can't blame me for that error, because both Lucci and Thugger use the same script when you begin to poke around asking questions about YFN. While the feds are convinced that YFN is a gang, Lucci insists that they're a non-violent record label focused on making millionaires off the men in their clique. Do you see the pattern? But the script doesn't end there. At some stage in their career, Every young artist needs an OG that will guide them through the game. For Young Thug, that OG turned out to be Birdman himself. Lucci, on the other hand, got his own props from Donovan Thomas, aka Big Nut, a rapper and a deeply respected native of Chicago. He connected Lucci to the right industry people and showed him the right channels that elevated his music career. So you can imagine how devastated Lucci would have been if something had happened to him. Well, you don't need to imagine, because something did happen to him. Big Nut got shot.
Search is on for the person who shot 3 people, including a 14-year-old. 1 man died.
All 3 victims, including a 14-year-old, were brought here to Grady Memorial Hospital, and 26-year-old Donovan Thomas was in the most serious condition, and the medical examiner's office confirmed he did not survive.
It was a drive-by at about 7:30 p.m. in the evening. Big Nut was standing in front of a barbershop on McDaniel Street in the Castleberry Hill neighborhood when a vehicle pulled up beside him and sprayed his torso with lead. He died on his way to the hospital. You can imagine that the death hurt YFN Lucci real bad. But then who pulled the trigger? Or even more importantly, who ordered the fingers that pulled the trigger? While the cops got busy doing what they normally do, the streets already knew, and they didn't even need evidence. Word on the street, YSL was behind the hit. And the man on top of it all was none other than Thugger himself. Now, before we move ahead, you're probably wondering why Big Nut got killed in the first place. Well, no one really knows, but we can make some guesses. Some sources claim that it was because they were from rival gangs. Believe me when I say this, for most gangs, that is more than enough reason for murder. Others say it's because Young Thug wanted to get at YFN Lucci. Again, there's no way to confirm this claim. However, the most insane theory paints Big Nut as a snitch that Thugger was prepared to do anything to get rid of. He was spilling secrets to the police and it got out. Now, everything we have covered so far happened in 2015 or before, because whether or not Big Nut was a snitch, his killing was a crime, and it was what triggered a violent war between YSL and YFN. 50 murders was the cost of one man's death, as both gangs, labels both labels took their jurisdictions into some of the bloodiest battles any rapper-themed feud has seen since the inception of the term. I'm talking hits on everyone. Nothing and no one was sacred. Not Lucci's mom.
Juju was in here, my baby mama, and my little girl and my mama and her friend. Both of them got shot though, my mama and her friend.
And not Thugger's baby mama. And while all of this was on, no one stopped to ask, why? Why do we have to fight for these 2 label bosses that would rather see themselves dead than settle out their beef in person like men? To Thugger's credit, YFN Lucci almost got killed on at least 2 different occasions, so maybe that counts for something. But wait a minute, don't get me wrong, I'm not the one jumping to conclusions here. These are the details from the case the feds built against Young Thug. Because while the streets tried to settle the blood owed on both sides, the feds waited patiently, taking their time over 6 long years before cracking down on the rapper with damning evidence. The kind of evidence that turned the big cats around him into rats. The kind of evidence that would make most birds sing. The kind of evidence that turned Gunna into a snitch. On the 10th of May 2022, Young Thug and 27 other members of the YSL label were confronted with 56-count charges that was listed out in an 88-page indictment. Young Thug's name was mentioned more than 40 times in that indictment. And as you can imagine, it wasn't for the right reasons. But even more crazy was the fact that it confirmed the fears of those who were certain that Thugger was guilty of Big Nut's murder, but were patient for the law to take its course. The indictment included charges of conspiring to violate the RICO Act, murder, armed robbery, and participation in criminal street gang activity. Then the indictment revealed that prosecutors were certain YSL, his label, was in fact a criminal street gang affiliated with the notorious National Blood Gang. Then the indictment went on to describe how Thugger not only ordered the killing, but how and from whom he rented the vehicle that was used in the murder of Big Nut, and how he gave the killers, members of his label/gang, money to lay low in the aftermath of Big Nut's murder. And for extra measure, prosecutors also alleged that 2 associates of YSL, Christian Eppinger and Antonio Sumlin, worked to get permission of Young Thug to make a second murder attempt on YFN Lucci while he was jailed in Fulton County. Oh yeah, I forgot that detail, pardon me. 1 year before Thugger found himself in the feds' crosshairs, YFN Lucci was forced to turn himself in when the police brought RICO charges to his doorstep. He got his own problems, so this is not the justice you think it is. It's all losses on every front. And I'm not even done with the evidence against Thugger. Turns out his men were also sloppy. Big Nard, a member of YSL, was in the drive-by vehicle that offed Big Nut. He had a cell phone with him that night, and during and after the hit on Big Nut, calls were made, and as you've probably guessed, they were tapped. According to the indictment, half an hour after the hit, Martinez Arnold, aka Lil Duke, another member of YSL, called from jail to Big Nard's cell phone. On paper, it all looks like they both knew and planned the hit together. Now to round this all up, the indictment also had details on the attempts Young Thug and his YSL crew made on YFN Lucci's life. Back in May 2019, Lucci almost got popped in a drive-by shooting. The G-Wagon, which was registered to Lucci's mom, was shot in both passenger windows, side doors, rear window, rear door, bumper, and even one of the rear tires. Somehow Lucci survived without sustaining any injuries. 2 weeks after that close shave with death, Lucci was shooting a video on Martin Street in southeast Atlanta when some ops started shooting at him at around 11:15 p.m. And once again, he survived, even without any serious injuries. You would think the attempt would end there. You would be wrong. Early 2002, months before Thugger's arrest at the hands of the feds, and while Lucci was being held in Fulton County Jail awaiting for his murder charge, someone stabbed him in the head in an attempt to take him out once and for all. Once again, they failed. But this time, prosecutors claimed they knew the culprits. 2 YSL members, Antonio Sumlin, aka Obama, and Christian Eppinger, aka Big Briss, allegedly who reportedly got the green light from Thugger himself. This is the case the feds built against Thugger. This is how they turned his crew against him. This is how they broke the thug. On his track Out of Sight, Out of Mind, Gunna said, "Some dudes get locked up and turn to a snitch, but I keep it solid and hard as a brick." In the words of Jay-Z, okay.
Please state after each statement whether or not you agree or acknowledge that the statements are true, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
I became affiliated with YSL around 2016. Is that true as it pertains to you, Mr. Kitchens?
Yes, ma'am.
14th December 2022, 29-year-old Sergio Kitchens, otherwise known as Gunna, shocks the hip-hop community, his fans, and Thugger himself as he chooses an early release in exchange for an Alford plea. An Alford plea? What the hell is an Alford plea? Well, while most people insist it's just snitching with extra steps, the official definition is a plea that allows the defendant to maintain their innocence whilst admitting that the evidence presented by the prosecution would likely persuade a judge or jury to find the defendant guilty. In plain English, Gunna gets to plead guilty and walk free without the consequences of pleading guilty. So people aren't completely wrong with their definition, but you probably still need me to break this down because he says yes ma'am to a lot of legal nonsense that sounds really serious. And trust me when I say it is. Because from all the indictments, the feds are not really interested in taking down YSL members. They're interested in taking down Young Thug alone. How do I know this? Well, every indicted YSL member has been offered deals. Everyone except Thugger. Now, by accepting his deal, Gunna implicated not only Thugger, but every one of his colleagues under the YSL banner. And that's because one major thing they had always wanted was for Gunna and his associates to admit that YSL was in fact a gang.
YSL is a music label and a gang, and you have personal knowledge that members or associates of YSL have committed crimes in furtherance of the gang.
Yes, ma'am.
If you know English, and I know that you know English because I've been speaking a lot of it from the start of this video, you know that this is the literal definition of a confession, which in street terms is the definition of snitching. Like I said from the very beginning, Young Thug had insisted over and over that YSL wasn't a gang, it was a label. With this yes ma'am confession, they got him to negate his boss. Unfortunately, it gets worse for Thugger.
You were present when law enforcement officers stopped the vehicle in which you were present along with Jeffrey Williams, wherein hydrocodone, methamphetamines, and a firearm were recovered. These items did not belong to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Talk about throwing the man under the bus. Now everyone had always known that Gunna had zero street cred. In fact, it's possible that he's telling the truth in this clip. It's possible that he didn't own the drugs and the strap found in the vehicle. But he was in that vehicle. He knew. But somehow it gets even worse.
And do you acknowledge the following statement? I recognize, accept, and deeply regret that my talent and music indirectly furthered YSL the gang to the detriment of my community. YSL as a gang must end. Is that your statement or acknowledgement?
Yes.
After Gunna was released, his lawyers shared a statement with the main purpose of showing that he wasn't a snitch. Gunna stated that he hadn't agreed to cooperate or testify for the feds and that he didn't intend to be part of the trial. Now, although he has said he won't testify, the feds will likely still subpoena Gunna to testify for them. And while one of the conditions of his Alford plea is that he can plead the fifth on the stand, can you just imagine how that would sound to a jury? Do you think they would hear all of that yes ma'am and then hear some several thousand I plead the fifth from the horse's mouth and say to themselves, oh, I think this Thugger gentleman might just be innocent. But wait, it still gets worse. Gunna's decision to yield to the feds broke the will of at least 8 other YSL members, who then decided to take a deal in exchange for not snitching on their boss. YSL co-founder Walter Murphy accepted a plea. Obama, Slime Life Shouty, and Lil Duke were all released after signing different deals that got the feds off their backs in exchange for some form of cooperation that technically doesn't paint them as snitches. But let's imagine for a second that none of the betrayal of these individuals got to Thug. They're all associates after all. They aren't blood, so it wouldn't hurt as much, right? On the 20th of December 2022, 6 days after Gunna's cop-out, Quantavious Greer, aka Funk, aka Young Thug's brother that he helped secure a release from a previous life sentence back in 2019, well, he also pled guilty in exchange for an undisclosed deal that would see him walk free without spending any time behind bars. Ouch. Did Thugger's brother really snitch on him? He insists that he didn't, but then why is everyone except Thugger getting a deal? Is he fighting a losing battle? Have the feds successfully broken the Thug? We'll find out soon enough.